Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Community Legal Centres Queensland webinar. We will get going in just a minute. I can see that there's still a few people coming on board. So I hope everybody's enjoying the rain if you're getting it. Just some practical things before I start the introductions. You'll see that you've got the option to write into a chat box, and if you click on your chat box, there's an email address there for any technical issues you might be experiencing. It's carly@communitylegalqueensland.org.au. And there's also there's a link to our website with some Keep Safe resources, some referrals around keeping mentally safe. So we've got a lot to get through today, and before I introduce our fabulous presenter, Dr. Mendy Nerelak, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're broadcasting this webinar today. I'm in Brisbane, and the people are the Turrbal and Yagara people. I wish to pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and acknowledge the really important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander First Nation people continue to play in our society. We know this webinar will be viewed by people across Queensland and across Australia, so I would also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the whole country and extend a warm welcome to any First Nations people listening to our broadcast today. So our webinar today is presented by Dr. Mendy Nerelak. It's entitled Practicing Healthy Boundaries for Healthy Relationships and Radical Self-Care. Dr. Mendy Nerelak may be familiar to many of you who attended a webinar back in June that she did. Mendy's a clinical psychologist in private practice. She takes a very holistic approach to her work with clients, looking at mind, body and spirit matters. She's a terrific presenter, and we're talking about psychological boundaries today. I know it's going to be a warm and engaging presentation, but if you have any concerns around or triggered by any of the presentations, as I mentioned before, we have the link to resources on our website that you might like to turn to if you want some more information about mental health and wellbeing. Anyway, I think that's enough from me. Mendy, welcome. Hello.
Oh, hello, Carrie-Anne, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction again. And thank you for inviting me to speak. Despite all the tech issues last time, I had a wonderful time speaking to you all, and I really enjoy teaching in this way. And this topic, I think, is a really important one. So when I'm teaching more broad, well, with my clients more broadly, my goal is always that whatever I share is informative, but and that people learn something, but I also want it to make sure that it's practical and pragmatic and that you can apply this stuff every day. So hopefully I'll be able to achieve that today as I speak with you. Yeah, my passion is to help people become aware of, maybe their unhelpful habits and to shift out of these so that, yeah, they become more physically and emotionally and spiritually well. So I'm really glad for your resources that you have. For the people listening, I think it's really important to flag that if at any point today something is triggered or you feel a little overwhelmed, please give yourself permission to resource yourself and contact those or get in touch or find those resources that are available to you. That's fantastic. Okay, so that's me. So I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty in a moment, but I think it's just so curious, this issue or this topic of boundaries, that it seems to have become a really, really hot issue right now. So, and I've been really curious about that, in private practice in the last few years or last couple of years even, almost every single one of my clients at some point, we touch in on boundaries, and that feels new to me. And I'm wondering about that, and I have a bit of an idea about that, why that is the case. And of course, boundaries have always been important because as humans, we are wired to connect, and boundaries help us to connect in ways that are safe and supported. But it does seem that right now there's a collective shift, or a paradigm shift, I would even say, where we're really starting to question the power dynamics that were operating and enforced, and we're not really accepting those anymore. So we want to sort of shift, you know, the boundaries around power, and really questioning and protesting why some people have power and some people don't, and why we've given away our power, and why some people have taken it from us, right? So this is, I think, what boundaries are about. So we might find that in our relationships, but also more broadly in our communities, within organizations and governments as well. And I also think there's another thing going on in that at this point in time, I don't think there has been a time there has been more demands on our time and energy. Right? I feel like that's immense. There's a lot of pressure, and I think it's not sustainable. I don't think many of us will say that the way we're using our time and energy is sustainable. But I don't think we know how to go about shifting that. Not the kind of more paradigm, you know, collective shift, nor the way that we use time and energy and set limits for ourselves now. Okay, so that's kind of a bit of a broad sense of why I think we really need this now. But because I've got a lot of content to get through, I kind of want to get started. And maybe if anyone has any comments or ideas about that, please use the comments section. I'd really like it if Carrie-Anne at the end, if we have time to ask questions or answer questions, that'd be great. And I'd like to look at people's comments as well.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat box, Mandy, and we'll get to those.
And if anyone finds, and then if there's something great or really interesting that I'm talking about, just even flag that as we go. Okay, but let's get into the nitty-gritty of talk today. So you know, so I've just talked about a bit of the, you know, maybe why, but let's get into the what and how. So I really love this simple and straightforward way that Pixie Lighthorse, that's her actual, I'm not sure if it's her actual name, it's an amazing name in any case, but she describes boundaries as the dividing lines between us and others, symbolizing where we end and someone else begins, right? It's so simple. And it describes how we have an edge and others have an edge as well. And that while most of us get this intellectually, I don't know if we're so conscious of our edges and other people's edges as we move about the world and relate to others. So this is actually going to be my focus for today, is that, you know, how can we experience our boundaries and be more conscious of them and be more conscious of other people's boundaries, and also how we can be really conscious of how we set limits, you know, what is our particular boundary style or relating style, and also how we can consciously shift any unhealthy patterns of setting limits and relating to people that we've learned, so that we can create more satisfying and harmonious relationships, and also feel satisfied and empowered within ourselves. Okay. So I just want to sort of spell out some broad concepts as we begin. So boundaries are relational, as I've already said, and relationships are the ground where we test our capacity to connect and give and receive. So in relationships, we exchange energy and power. Okay, so boundaries function to protect us, to help us set limits and keep us safe in relationships and in those connections. They also function to screen out any toxic or unwanted input from other people. And they also help contain our own emotions and our own thoughts and energy and vitality within ourselves. So when boundaries are functioning well, we find that within ourselves and within our relationships, there's a sense of well-being and trust and safety. But when this protective and screening function isn't working so well, we might feel within ourselves and within our relationships drained or frustrated. We might find these relationships very difficult or even dangerous. Okay. So now most of us weren't ever taught how to set limits effectively. So if we're shifting into this new paradigm where there's a lot of flux and people are questioning, you know, where is my limit and how am I going to use my time? I think we might have the intention that something has to change, but we haven't really been ever shown how to do that. So we need to really be compassionate and understanding of, you know, our current boundary failings. Like if we feel like we haven't set limits appropriately or effectively, because the way that we do boundaries now is almost certainly a product of our history and was historically a necessary and adaptive strategy that we had to learn. Okay, so maybe we weren't taught to be empowered, but to comply. Or maybe we were taught that actually, if I'm going to get through this life, I have to fiercely protect myself. So there's a sense of danger and threat there. So that's pretty clever that we learned how to do that. However, we might find that if we keep running that kind of program, or that, you know, use that conditioning to run our current present moment relationships, that it's not so successful. Okay, so that really means that our conditioning or our programming is obsolete or needs updating in some way. All right, so this is where boundaries work comes in. So this is about becoming conscious and aware of how you relate, how you set limits, what your habits are in relationships, and begin to take responsibility. So being conscious of that as an adult today, you do have a choice. So of course, you know, when we were younger, we may have felt disempowered, that we didn't really have a choice, but as adults we do. And so it's sort of really stepping out of, or it's really is about finding our power and ensuring that we take responsibility for the relationships that we have now. All right. So, okay, I'm just trying to coordinate moving slides as well. Okay, so I want to give a bit of a kind of a sense of what healthy boundaries might look like or feel like. And if this is something, as we're going through this, if you're going, yeah, I have some of those characteristics, or you find that really relatable, this is wonderful. And I do actually think that many of us do have healthy boundaries most of the time, and I'll talk about that shortly. You may even be able to identify people close to you that demonstrate healthy boundaries. And in that case, it would be great to watch these people as well if you feel like you do have trouble setting limits, so that you can really observe and learn from them as well. So if you have healthy boundaries, you know that you do have a choice. Okay, so you have agency. So this isn't about control, but you have the choice, you have the capacity to choose your best response. Okay, and as I said before, you know, someone with healthy boundaries knows that they can choose to protect themselves, to screen out unwanted stuff coming in from outside, and to contain their own power. So that means that they can say yes or no based on their own preferences, their own thoughts, their own values. The other important thing about healthy boundaries is that it's not just about us, it's about others as well, and that, you know, everybody has boundaries. So in Pixie's definition, it's like, you know, you have an edge and they have an edge. So you respect other people's limits, and you're conscious of your own foibles, say. So you really try and protect other people from your own projectiles or your own you know, habits that are becoming conscious. People with healthy boundaries are really aware that that exchange of power or energy between themselves and others is equal and fair. So there's a sense of balance there. And even though you're aware of your edge and that other people have an edge, and that you're conscious that you're an individual, you still can stay connected to other people at the same time. So to feel contained and like yourself, you don't have to separate yourself. Now, healthy boundaries are also flexible. So this means that they're firm, but they're not kind of solid brick or concrete, for instance. and that they do shift. So they're not firmly planted. They will sort of ebb and flow, so to speak, but consciously based on the situation or what you need in the moment, or the different people that you're around. So the really obvious example there is that, you know, your boundaries are much more open with someone like a partner or your children than even your colleagues, or, you know, the people that just live on your street, or strangers. So boundaries are responsive. Yeah. And these last couple of points, I think, can be really, I think these are the toughest ones actually when we're looking to kind of shift our boundaries, is that you might have a sense of your own preferences and desires and needs and values, but other people's may be very different to yours. So you can acknowledge and accept these differences without disconnecting from these people, right? So you don't have to just associate with people who share your ideas. And at the same time that you acknowledge that there are differences, you're not actually swayed to change your own ideas or thoughts or the way you feel based on how they do. So yeah, so if anyone, I think we can all project these qualities, you know, a lot of the time, some of the time. So I think it's really important to recognize when your boundaries are well and healthy, and tell people about it. You know, telling people about when you've done well with setting a limit can be a really great way to kind of amplify that and help that continue. All right. So we're going to talk more about unhealthy boundaries, but I just kind of wanted to put a bit of give you a bit of a flavor of what you might experience if you feel like there's been a boundary violation. And if any of these feel really familiar to you, just note that. And actually, yeah, just note that. And let this be kind of a signal for you to pay attention, as if these are common themes for you or common experiences, something might need to change. Yeah. So this is where you take responsibility. So typically you might feel invaded or drained or taken advantage of or inconvenienced. A common phrase is that someone made me feel like this, or I can't seem to say no, or I find it hard to say yes. You might feel people can't be trusted, or you feel unsafe. Okay. So just get a sense of that, and just note how you're experiencing some of these suggestions. And then to kind of get a sense of what boundary, you know, we all have a sense that, you know, this is what happens when my boundaries are violated, but what is it, you know, where is our edge? When we talk about an edge or our line, what are we actually talking about? And if you can think of your boundaries as kind of being different kind of levels, then, well, I find this very helpful to think about this as well. So we can think of our boundaries as either external boundaries or internal boundaries. And external boundaries are probably, you know, maybe feel a little bit more tangible. So it's, you know, our very physical body, the physical edge of our body, our skin, literally. And that can feel much easier to contact maybe. And then beyond our physical bodies, external from our physical bodies, is our personal space. So it's the space around us. And I know that every single one of us can relate to this, because we've all experienced the discomfort, you know, when we feel that our personal space has been invaded. You know, we know it. It's a felt sense that actually this person is too close. Or on the other end, actually, I would like to actually be closer to somebody. I feel a little isolated here. There's too much space between me and another person. And perhaps what people don't always think about as boundaries, but I think they definitely experience as a line, is their inner boundary, so that they have thoughts and opinions and beliefs and emotions that are separate from other people's thoughts and opinions and beliefs and emotions. So if you can think about your boundaries, you know, as your inner boundaries, your physical boundaries, and your personal space, you can kind of work out, where has my line been crossed? Which part of my boundaries, in a sense, has been violated? Okay. And most of the time, I think when we talk about boundaries or think about boundaries, we're really thinking verbal boundaries, you know, so how we set our limits by speaking or uttering. And this is really important, and we are definitely going to look at this today, but it's harder than you think, because what typically happens is that how we convey our boundaries first and how we can sense another person's boundaries is non-verbally. So it's your body-based gestures and somatic experiences. It's how you hold yourself. It's the movement you make, the gestures that you make with your hands or legs or body, shifts in facial expressions. So you feel that there's been a boundary violation, or you sense perhaps that somebody else close to you, you may have violated their boundaries. You feel that first, non-verbally, and you express that first, non-verbally. Okay, and this is where we're going to sort of start our sort of focus initially, sort of looking at this non-verbal stuff, because I don't think we think about it enough. And if we can get that, if we can get a sense of what is my body telling me in this moment, you know, does it want to set a limit or does it want to open up? I think it can go a long way to helping us really gain mastery over setting limits. Yeah, okay. But we're going to take just a moment to, so I like to do little exercises, and hopefully we can do all of them or most of them today. This, I just want to help you all get a sense of your own edges, just with a little visualization practice. So of course you don't have to participate in this, and you can just sort of listen or look at the little bubbles on the screen. So there's a bit of a theme going, all right, just a little warning and a flag there. And this should be fairly simple, and it's not very long, and it could even be an enjoyable experience, and it may even help give you have a calming effect and shift you into a different state of awareness, calm state of awareness. And you may even be able to use this as a resource immediately. Okay, so if you've got things in your hands, or if you're leaning forward or leaning back, or if you're sitting in a chair, I want you to sort of see if you can just sort of drop everything that's around you and just listen. Put your feet on the floor if you can. And so we're just going to get a sense first of our physical edge. So feet on the floor is a great place to start. So just notice that you have an edge at the soles of your feet. If you're sitting in a chair, see if you can feel the weight of yourself dropping into the chair, the edge of the back of your body. If you've got a back on your chair, lean back into it and feel the back of the body. And just notice the front of your body as well. And if it feels comfortable for you, you might want to just sort of wrap your arms around you and just squeeze the upper arms and the forearms, and maybe press into the thighs or tap the thighs. You might even want to lean down into the shins and just press or rub or tap the legs. If you want, you can come up or just notice the shoulders or squeeze into the shoulders, the top of the chest, down into the belly region. Just tapping, and you're just sort of bringing attention and awareness there by touching your own edge. If that feels okay for you, you can squeeze and press into your skull and your face. And then just take a deep breath in and just breathe out through the mouth and settle. And just get a sense of your body and the edge of your body. Just see if you can get a sense of your physical body and where it ends. Okay, and now I want you to turn your attention inwards. So you can close your eyes here, or you can keep them open. No rules. If they're open, keep them soft. Start to turn your attention inside into this inner world of body sensations, things like tingling or buzzing. Maybe there's some tightness or softness. You can just move your attention through your body, just noticing what's here. What is your unique experience inside right now? Maybe you can notice that you're having an emotional experience. Just name and observe the emotion. You may notice that your mind is doing something or thinking a particular thought or in a particular way. So we're just observing this without engaging in it. You're just kind of going, okay, so what's happening in my inner world? And just notice your breath now as well. And just notice that the flow and the rhythm of the breath is unique to you right now. And just notice it. So this is your inner space contained by your physical body. So breathe in and breathe out again, coming to the edge of your physical body once more. And now I'm going to invite you to imagine, so feel or see light or energy expanding from the edge of your physical body into the space around you. It's like a soft golden light, just expanding and moving into the space all around your body. And imagine it kind of forming like a little bubble that completely surrounds you. So you're completely surrounded at the front and behind you, both sides of you and above you and below you by this golden light. Okay, and breathe. And just notice how this little golden bubble of light is transparent. You can see through it. The edges are firm but flexible, and you may even notice how, as you breathe in and out, the edges of that bubble kind of just fluctuate with your breath. And that through this bubble, you actually have the capacity to slow down and choose what you send out into the world from yourself. And you can also observe what's coming in towards you and choose what you want to allow in. Yeah. So just getting a sense of your inner world, your physical body, and this golden bubble of light that surrounds you on all sides. And that as you become aware of that, you're also aware that other people in your world are also surrounded and contained within their own little bubble as well. So let's just take another deep breath in and out through the mouth and settle. And just come to be aware of your surroundings again and notice what you can hear, and maybe tap your feet and wriggle your body a little bit, stretch if that feels good, blink your eyes open and come back to the present moment. And you can keep this little bubble around you at all times, or turn to it at any time that you feel like you need just a little bit more protection or consciousness around boundaries. Okay. So you can kind of, if you kind of got this little calm little vibe going on, welcome that, and I'm going to continue. So just listen. So moving on to talking more about nonverbal boundaries. So as I said, often when I'm teaching or I see teaching around boundaries, they talk about, giving you the words, but, the thing is, I don't feel that's as effective as getting familiar with how to respond from more of that inner knowing. So, and like I said, our boundaries are primarily communicated non-verbally. Our body language will tell someone yes or no, and we'll be able to see that in other people. So becoming aware of what your particular body habit in relationships is, so body habit when you're in relationship is, and how you set limits and respond to limits will be amplified if you've got a sense of, or you gain mastery over what your body is telling you. So when I'm talking about nonverbal or body signals, I've just got a big list of what that might be. So these are the sort of things that we're keeping an eye on. So I kind of flagged that a little in that visualization. But we're sort of learning to attune to real subtle shifts in our inner state, things like tightening or constricting or softening even. There might be little impulses to pull back or stay still or reach out and lean forward. You might notice changes in your breath. So the breath might deepen, or it might get shallow, or you might stop breathing. And you might notice or become aware of really subtle shifts in your facial expression or other people's facial expression. So remember, we're also observing other people's limit setting as well. So things like eyes either squinting or widening, nodding or smiling, or you're shaking your head or averting your gaze, so shifts in, you know, where the eyes are looking. And there's also movements, so either stepping back or turning away, you know, firming your stance, making signals with your hands, pushing motions or stop signs. So if as we're speaking about this, you're kind of starting to get a sense or tuning into your own inner world, be really gentle with yourself. Make sure you regulate and keep breathing and observe. And as we talk more about this, you might actually start to be aware of what's happening within your body as we go along. So this is wonderful, okay? I know a lot of people really struggle with this, so be really patient with yourself, and you're just learning to kind of build this somatic vocabulary, this language of the body. So just be gentle and curious. Okay. So, so what do I want to say here? Mostly I want to say, I think I've said a lot of this already, but when we start to do boundary work, what that means is that we actually have to be conscious of what our pattern of relating is, so that we can adjust and revise our response to based on something that we're choosing that's appropriate in the present moment, rather than reacting or saying that I always do things this way, or this is just how I am. Okay, and that's reacting based on conditioning. And conditioning and that reactivity is the path of least resistance. So what I'm saying there is, when we take responsibility and choose to do the work, it actually can feel hard at first, because we have to make it conscious and we have to shift. So again, be patient and be kind and be compassionate with yourself when you're doing this. Resist blaming yourself or blaming others if you're having difficulty. So remember, we take responsibility. And that makes us empowered, right? So when we're talking about self-care, it feels good to actually choose something. It feels good to kind of state our preferences. So if we start to blame ourselves or blame people, it's a disempowering kind of attitude to have. You're giving yourself power, or you're giving your power over to somebody else if you're starting to blame them for your circumstances. Okay. We're going to, I'm going to talk about some styles of limit setting. This is based on attachment theory. So if some of you are familiar with that, then you might sort of see some congruence there. But I'm going to talk about these in more extremes, and I don't think any of us, or not many of us, are really all of this or all of that. But I want to paint a picture of what each of these edges look like, or more extreme edges, and just see what seems to, what you seem to identify, or what seems familiar to you. Okay, so when we're sort of looking at all of these styles, again, we need to remember that all of these are kind of tactics, are just ways that we've tried to get the love and connection that we desire. Okay, so we all want that love and connection. We just maybe haven't gone about it in a way that is sustainable and healthy for us. So this first style I'm calling under boundary. So this is based on Pat Ogden's work. She calls it under boundary, and I think I like it, rather than using the attachment language, but it is more approach. So this sort of person, if you tend to be more open, or even too open, you tend to give a lot or share a lot, or maybe even share too much. This is kind of what really distinguishes this style. This person might be described as more collapsed, or might physically collapse into their vocabulary, but they may not even feel that inner strength. So they can't defend themselves, or feel like they can't defend and protect themselves, or that they're not even allowed to defend and protect themselves. So they do tend to comply and default to say yes and be people pleasers. So essentially they have problems setting limits and saying no. The consequence of this, though, is that they can feel very victimized and let down by others, and their inner worlds also may not be so clear. So their boundaries are very porous or non-existent, you know, all over. So they may turn to other people for advice or direction because they don't know what they like, or they don't know what to think, or they don't know what is right or wrong. So they can be easily swayed by others, and this actually can leave them very vulnerable to be taken advantage of. So it can become a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy. The flip side of this is that they don't have boundaries, and they also don't see others as having boundaries either. So in that case, there can be, like merging of identities, where you can't kind of distinguish between, say, a couple that they both seem to share or overshare with each other, and you can't distinguish one from the other so much. All right, so let's go to the, and this little sort of image, I suppose, using the personal boundaries, the physical boundaries, and the inner boundaries, you can kind of see how there's this kind of merging and almost consuming of one person by another. If anyone is feeling this, take care. Okay. And then on the other end is this over-boundaried style. So this sort of person tends to have very, very rigid and firm, maybe even extreme boundaries. They tend to avoid or pull away or withhold connection or information. You might not know a lot about these people because they don't really share their inner world very much. They tend to be maybe more defensive, and their default is no. So they'll say no. And perhaps even aggressively set these limits of no. People who are over-boundaried tend to be very self-sufficient and self-reliant, so they don't ask for help. They don't tend to trust other people. They kind of view other people as unreliable. I can't rely on anybody. I've got to do it all on my own. And at the same time, they can be really hypersensitive to when other people come close to them. So they feel those strongly as intrusions. People who are over-boundaried tend to feel very, very challenged by their friends and loved ones who really demand more emotional connection from them. They find that very hard. Okay, and then probably where I identify, or historically, is a bit more of a pendulum. So this is really alternating or swinging between under and over-boundaried. So there may be, you might initially really kind of relinquish and give in and open up to people, and maybe get too open and overshare, and then feel kind of drained, maybe victimized and disappointed in other people, that are being taken advantage of again. And then you retreat, you put up those rigid limits, those walls, you avoid people and you push people away. But then you feel isolated and lonely, and then you completely open up again and you move in to other people's spaces and you share too much, and it goes on. Okay, so like I said, this is probably my conditioning is more swinging between one extreme and the other. And I kind of identified that, historically, I got the message that, people can't be trusted, but at the same time, you have to do what people want. You may as well give in, because, what's the point of fighting back? So there's these two extremes of beliefs that I was, I suppose, inoculated with by my family, bless them, but which I'm really kind of working on letting go of. And then there is the leaky boundary. And I suppose this is where I am at now, and it's probably where a lot of people are, where their boundaries are healthy most of the time, but in certain situations or with some people, you can get a little gappy. Now, it can also be when you're feeling a little vulnerable, so when you're tired or stressed, or just like in a temporary different state. Okay, so the question here to ask is, if you have a leaky boundary, where am I leaking? In what area of my life am I leaking? With who am I leaking on? Or who is crossing that particular line or boundary within me? Okay, so I'm just going to take a bit of a breath here and just a drink. But last time I spoke with you all, and if some of you sort of were with me last time, I spoke about the window of tolerance, and I'm not going to go into great detail here. I'm going to defer back to the original recording or PowerPoint about more detail about the window of tolerance. But just a quick revise here. The window of tolerance is kind of just illustrates, it's a model that illustrates our capacity to manage I suppose the ups and downs of life, and your capacity to stay calm and collected and online and conscious in the face of challenges. So I'm going to maybe just illustrate how the window, so how each boundary style, might be understood energetically on this model. So if you remember, the red line at the top is more like the upper limits of your edge, so when energy is high, this is as high as I can go and still stay safe and conscious and feel well. And the blue line down the bottom is kind of like the lower edge of your limit, where how low and calm and restful can you be without really dropping off, right? So there's some integrity here. So that sort of wavy line at the beginning kind of illustrates how, across time, say across a day, our energy will ebb and flow. But as long as it stays within, that top and that bottom edge, we actually feel very well and we feel like we can handle things. So if we were to then just create a scenario where, just say 2 different people are triggered and they feel like a boundary is being crossed here. So let's just say that they've been asked to do something that they don't want to do. And there's a request that they don't want to do. So the over-boundaried person, illustrated by the red line, is going to have more of a hot and reactive response to that. So you can see there's the request, and this is actually triggered energy to go upwards toward the edge of the boundary here, but they haven't got the capacity to be conscious and regulate. They go into unconscious reactivity and they fly up very high up out of their window into a fight, flight, freeze type adrenal response, which is more like an anxiety or a panic or rage response. And they do their very harsh and perhaps overly aggressive no to that. Alternatively, say another person is asked the same thing and they also want to say no. And you can see after the trigger that initially there is a kind of a heightened response going, actually, I don't want to say yes to this. My body is actually signaling that I need to set a limit. However, their conditioning overrides that. They go, actually, I suppose I should. If someone asks me to do something, the best thing is to make people happy. And they will then down regulate, I suppose, and drop down into the lower part of their window, past the edge into giving in or passivity or collapse, and go into a very low state. So there's a sense of despondency or upset or, I did it again, a real powerlessness. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there hanging a little bit, and I'm going to, as we talk about what to do and how we can rectify or reset our limits, I'm going to return to the model so that you can see what that might look like. So if this is helpful, let me know. Because I'm very visual, so I find that if I can see something, it can help me make sense of it a little more. Okay, so here we are with more bubbles. But and I was going to do a little exercise here, but I think I'm going to leave it for the moment because I think we're going to run out of time. And I thought I would run out of time. So I've actually, after this slide, just given an example of things that you can reflect upon in your own experience. So just situations where you're under or over boundaried, or when you swing between, and how you experience that in your bodies. Okay, so I'm going to leave that with you and continue. So what can you do when you're working with your boundary style, when you're conscious that actually I tend to be under boundaried? Your boundary work is to strengthen your no and make your yes conscious and responsive. So if you're saying yes to something, you really want to say yes to something. So this means that you need to know what your thoughts and feelings and desires are. So this is about connecting more to yourself, understanding what you like and what you don't like, and that you're actually allowed to be selfish. And I know there's a lot of guilt that can happen with under-boundaried people who are under-boundaried. They feel bad about thinking of themselves. So I've put here resources, and in my previous talk, there were a lot of resources there that I shared with you. So I'm going to defer to that. So your resources are going to be about grounding and aligning. So really feeling your body and feeling your edges and containing your edges so that you can address that lack of integrity and that tendency to collapse and be thrown off by other people. So your words and actions and gestures are going to be activating and empowering. So things like below, and if you guys, as you're listening to this, want to test these out and see how they feel, you know, it's shaking your head, narrowing your eyes, and just even try this one, just putting your hand up in a stop sign and pushing away, or even pushing against resistance. So if there's a table or something in front of you, just pushing. So little practices and actions like this, even out of context, just getting yourself familiar with how that feels in your body. You know, even practicing, you know, shaking your head can be a great start if you do tend to be more under-boundaried. And then on the flip side of that, and perhaps you can kind of sense this is how it is for over-boundaried, it is about practice choosing yes safely. So we want to keep the empowerment that the over-boundaried style has, but regulate it down so that it's conscious and safe, so you still feel safe, and that your no is actually also consciously chosen responses. So absolutely okay to say no if you do have this style, but be sure that you're saying no because you really don't want it, not because it's a reflexive action. And so people who are more over-boundaried need to learn that just because someone is close to you and wants an emotional connection, say it doesn't mean that it's dangerous. So the work for this kind of style is to soften and to open whilst staying contained. And it's really hard to let go. So this is basically letting go. And so it's easier than, if you remember, I talked about meeting your mood in the other talk. You may need to kind of do more activating practices or tensing your muscles before you can allow yourself to soften and relax. And that's kind of before the talk that I did, I could really feel a lot of charge in my hands and I was trying to relax. So I actually did some pushing practice and moved my body a lot to kind of release some of that excess tension so that I could soften and open up and be calm to talk to you all. And so the non-verbal words, so non-verbal gestures and actions and the words used here would be things like smiling and nodding and making soft eye contact and leaning in. And if you want to practice even noticing what it feels like to, you know, reach out with your hand, you know, with your palm up, you know, what does that feel like to you? So if you're over boundary, this might feel really hard for you to do. So you might just want to practice gestures like that, just, you know, out of context, just as a, like exercise, right? Breathing out, softening the muscles, softening facial expressions. So if we go back now to the window of tolerance, you can kind of see the adjustments that needed to be made to say this no here. Both people wanted to say no. So the under-boundaried person needed to contact that energy and be willing to move out and beyond, or just beyond their window of tolerance at the top edge, and enforce that limit whilst keeping their mind online. So engage the resources to keep them feeling strong, whilst the person who would reactively go up would continue to, you know, use that activation, but help contain that a little bit and be conscious of that so that they're not overreacting and setting it limits too aggressively. And similarly, down the bottom here, this is about a yes, where you can be soft and open and say yes consciously without losing integrity. Okay. Right. All right. Another moment to breathe. And I think we're going to be able to get through this, but we might be tight on questions. So I really love this image. It's, I think it's a really sweet way to think about what it might be like when we just begin revising and navigating our limits and setting limits and knowing where other people's limits and boundaries are. So it can look a little messy. It can be a little imperfect. It can feel a little awkward at first. That's normal, but persist. It's so worthwhile. You know, people think, or we think, that if we set a limit that we're going to push people away, or and that's really risky for us to do that. But what it can do is help us feel really safe and expand, and help us actually lean in to relationships, because there's more trust around that. We have more trust in our relationships, that our boundaries are going to be respected, and that we'll respect other people's boundaries as well. So this last little bit that I'm going to do is about verbal boundaries, and it's fairly straightforward in that I've kind of just listed ways that you can set boundaries, but the importance here is that we work to make sure that our body language actually conveys the same message as our words. Okay, so practice matching your words to your actions so that the message that you're delivering is super clear. The other thing when we're setting verbal boundaries, and particularly in conflict, is that really hold so much care and respect for yourself and the other person in that exchange. So just watch out for any sense of, you know, righteousness, or I'm right and he's wrong, or resentment for the other person. And be willing to just keep checking in on yourself to see where you are in your window, whether you are dysregulated and need to resource yourself first before you engage in any communication. And just because you don't kind of push hard against something doesn't mean that that's disempowering to you. So choosing that middle path, you know, just staying within your window, or just stretching the window a little bit so that you can consciously choose, is what's empowering here and is what feels good. Okay, so how to set verbal limits. So I would literally practice this out loud if this is a hard thing for you. So I've got little templates here. You just, you know, plug in your own words and then practice with your pet, with your partner, just out loud to yourself. I like to just, I talk out loud a lot. I find it really helps clear my throat. So I've just got some examples here. Setting a limit. So I actually like this second one. Because this is an actual example of someone who actually was more over-boundaried, had a girlfriend, and she was coming around all the time. He really wanted to stay in contact and engage and develop this relationship, but he was really bothered by how she wasn't really letting him know. So he actually said this in loving connection with her, making soft eye contact and touch. He said, dropping over unannounced is not okay with me. I'd like it if you text and check if it's okay first. And she was totally okay with this. And in fact, it helped deepen his sense of trust in her that his boundaries would be respected. So this second example, are just conveying your preferences. You know, this is what I like. This is what works for me. The important thing here is don't become attached to getting what you want all the time. But it's important still to know what you would like. If there is an issue that your preferences are constantly being overlooked, then that might be time to set a different sort of limit, right? It's not okay with me that you never consider my view, right? Or my desires. This is what I'd like you to do instead. And then also just different ways of saying no or yes. I mean, of course, we can just say no and yes, and that can be very powerful. But things like, you know, that makes me feel uncomfortable, or absolutely not, or yes, that's good. Okay. And then I suppose I've already said this in some way. It's important to fight fair. So this isn't about winning against the other person. This is about staying connected. So you want to be able to have your limits expressed clearly, but stay connected. So watch out for signs of overwhelm in yourself and others. So this is where awareness is important. So if the other person is getting overwhelmed and they're not quite as conscious as you are, you know, take a moment to step back. So use your resources, or, you know, help them maybe engage in some resources themselves, so that you can both stay within your window of tolerance, and give yourself time to choose. So that bubble, that little golden bubble of light, imagine that as stuff comes in and stuff goes out, it kind of creates a slowing down, you know, an enhanced consciousness, so that you can decide what is it that I want to put out there I need time to do that. An example here is my daughter, who's a teenager, is horrified when she can't respond to somebody's message immediately. Like she goes, I can't leave them on read. And I think I just can't believe that, you know. It's like the pressure to actually come up with a conscious response straight away, I don't think is realistic. So, you know, buck against that kind of demand. It's important that you give yourself time, or give others time if they need it, to choose with consciousness. Okay. So I've just given some other examples of how you can kind of have a disagreement maybe, or sort of disagree with somebody, but stay within it. So you can recognize that there are particular parts that you can see another person's view. You know, okay, I need a moment to think about that. That's setting a limit. You can kind of state that you can see how they think and feel, even though you don't share that view. And you kind of set limits about what's okay and what's not okay. So, you know, name calling is a deal breaker, or this is mine here. I don't answer messages after 6 p.m. Forget it, you know. And the last three are kind of ways that you can kind of bide time, or if you have feel like you haven't set the limits the way that you want, you can go in and redo and repair. These are really powerful. So, you know, even saying, this is in couples, this is really important, you know, I'm finding this conversation really intense, I'm getting really angry, and I don't want to say something that I regret. I'd like to come back to this in an hour. I'm going to go for a run. Once I've settled, let's start this conversation again. Okay, so it's excellent self-care, and it builds trust, because you're not going to revert to hurtful actions or words. This is one that I've used. I used to say yes to almost everything. So this is to an old boss who asked me to continue my contract when I didn't really want to. I wanted to start private practice. I know I said I'd do such and such, but actually I was reacting before I had time to think. What I can do instead is this, or what I prefer to do instead is this. So this is a redo. Or repair is more like really recognizing that you've made a bit of a blunder, or that you've hurt somebody. So I've overreacted and felt threatened when you asked me to do that thing. I can't help now, but I'm willing to help you at this other time when I'm ready. Okay, and thanks for understanding. So we're kind of pretty much coming to the end. And Carrie Ann, I was going to do a little practice, so I probably don't have time for that. But I have.
I think you could. You've still got a great deal of participants engaged, and there are no questions so far. So
okay, was I talking too fast?
The practice,
people are overwhelmed.
The practice element is really valuable.
Okay, so all right, so I've got the little screen there, and I suppose this is just a way to kind of integrate some of the things. Again, I don't want it to be too heavy. So, but I want people to be comfortable. So you can just listen, or you can pop your pens and things down, and just really just settle back and just listen to me, and just take what feels useful and helpful. You can gaze at the beautiful little bubbles on the grass in front of you. How sweet is that picture? I just really love it. And if it feels okay to close your eyes, you can close your eyes. And I'm going to ask you to just bring to mind just a situation in your life where you feel either you find it hard to set limits, or you set limits too harshly, or even that you kind of swing from one or the other. And I don't want this to be the most difficult situation that you're facing at the moment. So let this kind of be a kind of a lightish one, but one that you might contact every day or regularly, that you'd like to shift. Okay, so once more, just feel yourself sitting, and just feel your physical edge, feel your body. Take your attention inside, and just notice just the ebb and the flow of your breath, and notice any sensations that are happening in your body right now. Maybe as you've contacted this experience or this moment, you're noticing some emotional thoughts. So again, we're not engaging deeply with any of that. We're just being observant of what's here. You can name what you see. And once more, move through from the inner world into your physical body and expand into the space around you. And once more, see yourself kind of completely kind of and safely encased or surrounded by this golden bubble of light. And remember, when we're in this sort of bubble, we can kind of see what's happening, but everything becomes slower so that we've got the time to make it conscious and be very observant. So just take this situation and just put it in front of you and notice now what's happening in your body. Maybe there's a sensation there that you can contact. Notice how your posture is. How are you standing or sitting? You know, how close are you to this situation or issue or person physically? What's your breathing like? Do you find that your body wants to move in a particular way or gesture? Is your face doing something? So just kind of get a sense of what's actually happening within me and physically right now. And just step back and observe this, sort of really slow it down, be very curious. And imagine in this situation that you want to shift, that, you know, you convey the limit in the way that feels right for you, that you'd prefer to, but that sometimes you can't quite do. So how do you want to convey this revised boundary with your body? How does your body perhaps want to shift? What does your facial expression convey? Is there something change in your posture, or do you make a gesture with your arms, your body, a movement? And are there particular words that seem to just come up spontaneously? Is there something that needs to be spoken about here? And just allow awareness of that to come. And if it feels safe for you to do so, just even speak those words out loud or whisper them. Yeah. And just notice how that feels in your body when you choose your response. There's no right or wrong way to feel it. You may feel uncomfortable. It may feel good. Just notice how this feels in your body. Notice what's happening. And then contact your breath again and deepen it. Just letting everything settle. As you breathe out, maybe take a few more breaths and just let everything settle, and just allow awareness of that re-experiencing of that moment just settle as well. You don't need to overthink it at the moment. Just kind of just let it settle into your body mind. And deepen your breath and tap your feet on the floor and maybe squeeze your arms and maybe stretch if that feels good. Listen for sounds around you, and if your eyes are closed, blink them open and shut, and really come to be aware of where you are again right now in the room that you're in, where you are. Okay. And if anybody has any comments, or even if you want to write any notes down for yourself about that, just feel free to do that and share. And I'm going to finish up there. So we're kind of ending there. So if anyone needs a little bit more time to settle, just, you know, quietly keep settling, and give yourself permission perhaps after this talk to take some time to relax more. Oh, I'm going backwards. Let me go forwards.
That's amazing. And we've still got a lot of people on the line with us. So it reminded me, and you may have shared this quote in your last lot of slides, but I had to quickly Google it because it stayed with me. And it was from Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist.
Yes.
He said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think that's exactly the resource that you've given us today.
Yeah.
And I thank you.
Yeah, and we're doing it. It gives me goosebumps, right? And, you know, I love it. And, you know, I love the visual of the bubble as well. Hopefully that's useful for people, that actually there's that space, right? And we can be so conscious that it's almost as if time slows down and we can choose what we do. And it's very empowering, because we want to have relationships that feel safe, and we want to be safe. We want to others to feel safe with us too. And I think that's what it takes. It takes us to be really conscious of really choosing, and not in a really kind of rigid way. It's actually, you know, in connection with another person that we do this.
It's so true. And I loved your concept of redo and repair, that if you don't actually get your boundary right, you know, when you're practicing it the first time, or when you've been reactive or underreactive, that most times you get an opportunity to say, actually, after thinking about this, or, you know, I was reactive, or it's actually not what I want. And I think when we hear each other saying that and being able to, you know, talk about those kind of reflections, it gives permission for others to go, oh, I said I wanted this, but actually, you know, now things have changed, or what I really wanted was this. And have those conversations.
And like, can we do that? Yeah. And I think that's that renegotiation of power. It's like, we don't actually have to be beholden to, you know, our first response often isn't our right response. Can we please give ourselves a break and go, actually, this is actually what I want. I do this. My daughter, who's 16, I think I've talked about her already, she calls me out a lot. She goes, and she's very, you know, what you said was actually kind of like, I was like, wow, yeah, actually, can we do that again? I really didn't like the way I said that. This is actually what I meant to say. You know, when I'm conscious, this is what I mean to say. And we can call people out as well. And imagine if everyone starts to do that, I mean, this is my last quote, it has a ripple effect. So, look, I'm just going to finish up because I know people are kind of right at the end. And this is my Dr. E, you know, she's my guru. And she's basically said everything encapsulated, you know, right response carries insight and right amounts of compassion and strength, right? We can be both loving and strong together. Injured instincts. So when I talk about conditioning, I'm also talking about hurts and traumas, right? They must be righted by practicing and enforcing strong boundaries, and by practicing firm and, when possible, generous responses, but solid ones nevertheless. So powerful. So powerful. And just some final words as well. So I know that there's a lot of information here. So like I said, I just want to make sure that I can be helpful. So if you can choose one thing from today, just one thing that you was like, that's kind of interesting, I'm just going to pay attention to that, that's good, right? So don't feel like you have to do everything. So if it's redo, repair, or if it's like, you know, paying attention to my body signals, or even just kind of reviewing the window of tolerance, just one thing. And just practicing taking a deep breath. Yeah, just take a deep breath. Oh, I'm just going to walk around with my golden bubble of light for a day and see how that feels, you know. and maybe, but start to commit to understanding what your typical style of relating is, so that you can start to be conscious of it. And yet just begin small measured risks, you know, start this work, you know, in your everyday mundane, you know, stating your preferences for where you want to go for dinner. Saying, if you always say no to your kids, and this is something that I did with my first kid, he's an adult now, you know, I was much more of a no person with him. And, you know, I had, softening up, I had to soften up around him and learn to say yes. So that's a bit confidence building, where you can do a little bit every day. So over boundary people work towards softening and expanding and saying yes and a conscious no. Under boundary work towards containing and strengthening and saying no with a conscious yes. So the redo and repair, like you said, are great. I put here, avoid saying sorry, you know, say just sorries for when they really, really matter, right? So don't go, I'm sorry, but I can't come today. Don't say that. Just say I can't come. So if you've done something that really requires a conscious apology, make it worthwhile. You know, you mean it then. And just in terms of respect of meaning. Sorry, go ahead, Kerry.
Is really important. And I know, just trying to sort of relate it back to the community legal centre client work context, is that we often have to triage, you know, clients who are asking for more services than what can be provided, or, you know, who might be exhibiting difficult behaviours. And at that very first point of contact with the centre, it's really good for us to be able to be clear. Obviously, we may have to apologise about our lack of resources, but to help the person as much as we can within the parameters of what our service is all about.
Yeah. And also, I don't know if you have to apologise for your lack of resources. It's like our resources can't handle that. I know that's hard to take, right? So it's compassion.
Yeah, I think compassion is the right approach, I think. Yeah. So you're saying don't even apologise.
Not sorry. No, it's not your fault.
It's not my fault.
It's got nothing to do with how much funding you get. Why are you sorry? You know, show compassion.
Yeah.
And yeah, all right. And this last one. So okay, my last slide. Okay, I've overblown my my limit again. So it only takes. So don't underestimate how powerful. I know.
That's great. It's worthwhile.
Don't underestimate how powerful just small shifts that you can make every day can have. Okay, so Pixie again says it only takes one person's shift to create a new ripple. So if you start doing it and someone sees you doing that, or you start acting in this way to somebody else, it just resets everything. You'll change your relationships. It's so powerful. I hear about the power of, and it's a subtle power. It's not an overblown power. The power of actually going, I just made these few changes and the way that I relate to my kids is completely different now, you know, or the way that I relate to my clients is completely different now. I see a few people for supervision who deal with challenging client populations, and limits and setting limits is so important there, but it changes the way that they relate to you as well. Okay. So that's, look at that. That's the end for me. Thank you
There's a
so
bubble for
much,
each of us in there. Yeah. Some of us have big bubbles and some of us have small bubbles. Mandy, I can't thank you enough. I think that there's gems of gold in there for everybody who's listened, and I certainly will be going back and listening to the recorded presentation again to get some more gems.
Okay. It's a long one, hopefully. But yeah, just if you want to just pull one thing out, that would be great. Pull one thing out, everybody. Okay, thank you so much, Carrie Ann. Thank you everybody for listening, and those who stayed. Thank you so much. I value your feedback. So even after the fact, if you want to let Carrie Ann or Carly know what you liked, even what you didn't like, please forward that through. Thank you so much.
We send out a survey. And thank you so much, everybody. And we'll look forward to joining us again next time. Thanks, Mandy.
Thanks, Carrie. Bye-bye.
Bye.